Now, the chances are if you own an electric car, you're probably really excited about getting into it every day, driving on electric. Of course, you've got that zero emissions, instantaneous torque, you can put the heating on before you get to it and even de-ice your car. And let's not forget that silent drive. But if you're paying close attention to your range on the bottom of your instrument cluster, you'll notice that every time you get in it, it can vary, and sometimes it can be a little bit lower than normal. Take this car for example, the Mercedes-Benz EQB. It has a range of up to 253 miles, and although it's fully charged at the moment, according to the screen there it's 171 miles. So why has that changed so much? And actually it's as simple as this. That number that you see on your instrument cluster on every car is adaptive and predictive. So that number is basically worked out on a number of variables the car has access to. Now I'll cover a couple of those in just a second, but then also, most importantly, run through some tips and tricks on how you can maximize your electric range in your electric car. And it all starts with a thing called WLTP. WLTP stands for Worldwide Harmonised Light Vehicles Test Procedure. Every car sold in the UK has to have this test, and it shows you the miles per gallon of a car or how many miles range, if it's electric, it can go up to. And the key word there is up to. We all drive in different settings. Some of us live in built up areas, some live in the countryside, some of us directly in the busiest part of the country. So the number you see when purchasing a car is possible, but because there are so many variables, it's best to use this number as a comparison when comparing to other manufacturers, because handily, they've all done the same test in exactly the same way. In fact, here is WLTP. WLTP range is the theoretical maximum range the car will ever achieve in the best possible conditions. Figures may not reflect real-life driving results, which will depend upon a number of factors, including the starting charge of the battery, where you drive, use of AC and heating, windows open and closed, factory fitted options such as wheel sizes, accessories fitted, variations in weather, driving styles and vehicle load. And in that list, there are a couple of extremely important points. Number one is the weather, number two, where and how you drive, and then number three, use of AC and heating. And those three reasons are the reasons why the range varies massively from driver to driver. So take number one, the weather. The UK is literally just about to go into its winter, which naturally means with lithium-ion batteries, they don't like the cold too much. So of course the range will drop slightly. Now, of course, most electric cars do have a kind of thermal management system, so they can keep the battery cool or warm to a degree, but of course it will have an impact, so you must factor it in. And of course as well, the obvious thing, when of course you're driving around in the winter, you'll probably have your heating on. So much like your home, you will use more power in the winter. Same thing goes for an electric car or a plug-in hybrid. So watch this, currently max charged in a room that's about 20 degrees. Look what happens when I put the heating on max. And you'll see there the number will predict and change, kind of estimate, you know, the max kind of miles you can do based on the power consumption in the car. The other thing, of course, is where and how you drive. So of course the how you drive is kind of obvious. If you're driving in sport mode all the time and racing people at traffic lights, then yes, the range will be a bit lower, because electric cars are very, very powerful. But the number one thing that you must factor in as well is where you drive. If you drive in a built up area like a town or city, of course with stop start, lots of traffic, that will impact the range. Your most optimum speed of an EV is to travel between 40 and 60 miles an hour and try and keep the car moving for as long as possible. So that's the reasons why the range might be slightly less. Let's focus on some tips and tricks now on how you can maximise your range when driving on electric in an electric car or a plug-in hybrid. There's no getting around it, batteries don't like the cold weather, so you must factor that in when driving electric. But there is one thing you can do to help. Rather than get into a cold car and immediately put your heating on and lose all that range warming the car for a short journey, use pre-entry climate control while it's plugged in. It's probably already charged from overnight, so if you use your heating, you can get the car nice and warm and ready for when you want to go in the morning. Now, of course, the other thing is where you drive, as I mentioned. So the best thing to kind of do is to try and get to your designated speed and try and stay there. Because if you do lots of stop-start traffic, like in town, for example, this will impact your range. So kind of accelerate smoothly up to your designated speed and try not to race people at lights and that sort of thing. So see, it's a 70-mile-an-hour road here. If I travelled at 60, according to the Department of Energy, you'll actually use up to 14% less energy with wind resistance and that sort of thing. So if you do the math, on this car, it's about 30 miles extra you'll gain just from travelling about 10 miles an hour less. So I'm sure that'd be fairly similar compared to other electric cars, but worth considering. Now, I have mentioned live traffic a couple of times, so definitely make use of that. In most modern cars, they do include live traffic free for a set time. So in this car, it's free for 3 years on this screen here, renewed on the pop-up banner up above on Mercedes Me. So more info on that. But you know, if it's expired, make sure you renew it. Or if you don't want to pay for it, then do Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. That will allow you to put Apple Maps or Google Maps or even Waze up onto the screen here. And that is a free live traffic service that is kind of already incorporated in your phone. So make sure you use live traffic wherever you can, even if it's on your commute to work and back, just because you never know, there could be a quicker route just around the corner. Now, up next then, guys, is a thing called brake recuperation or regenerative braking. So the way this works in electric cars and plug-in hybrids, when you go to use the brake pedal, it will actually try and recoup some of that power and put it back into the battery. It's an automatic process. But on some cars, especially on Mercedes-Benz cars, in their electric cars, you can adjust that brake recuperation using the paddles, because normally paddles would change gear. But of course, in an electric car, there are no gears. Well, most of them anyway. There's a couple of manufacturers out there that have like a 2-speed motor, but for the vast majority of them, it's just a single speed. So look at the screen here. When I go to accelerate, you'll see that it will go up like this. And as soon as you take your foot off the accelerator pedal, it'll start to recoup some of that power. And if you brake a bit more, you'll see it will go all the way back down like this and slowly kind of feed in the actual brakes. So yes, believe it or not, when you actually brake in an EV, you're not always using your brake pads and discs. It's actually reversing the polarity of the electric motor. Now, of course, with all this, you can actually adjust it using the paddle. So if you press the left paddle, you can increase that brake recuperation. But of course, if you're not used to this, make sure there's no one behind you, because if you aren't prepared for it, it can slow you down a lot. And no, my foot was not on the brake pedal there. So you must make sure you obviously control that using the accelerator pedal, because otherwise you'll find yourself stopping quite quickly. But it is quite good because obviously you can control how much recuperation the car will do, kind of maximising your efficiency. Now, another important fact, guys, is tyre pressures. These play a particularly important part with EVs. Well, they play a particularly important part with every car, but more especially on EVs, because EVs are so aerodynamically designed, the slightest imbalance can affect your range. So make sure your tyres are all pumped up as they should be. I'd probably get back into that same rule that we're always used to with cars, showing my age a tiny bit, basically where you check your tyre pressures once a month. So make sure that you get them all pumped up to the correct PSI or KPA, depending on the car. In Mercedes-Benz, they're found on the charge flap or the fuel filler cap. And as well, for those with a keen eye, you'll notice that I'm also using the limiter and cruise control. Now, this also plays a particularly important part, because if you can limit the amount of speed you go to, rather than say it was 70 down the road and you're then going up to 75, speeding, then you drop down. If you can just literally keep it at that same speed, so I've got it set to 60 because I don't need to go any faster than that, keep it at that speed using the limiter or the cruise control. Now, I have got a separate video on how to use those. They're on the pop-up banner up above, but in a Mercedes-Benz, they're literally on the bottom right-hand corner of the steering wheel, or if it's slightly older, it'll be a kind of stalk just here on the left-hand side. So make sure you use those, because those will definitely help maintain that efficiency even further. And then lastly, guys, is a thing called dynamic select. So this is basically the driving mode. So yes, even electric cars and plug-in hybrids have these. Plug-in hybrids do usually have a few more modes, so I won't cover all the different driving modes in this video, but I do have a separate video on the plug-in hybrid on the pop-up banner up above. But quite simply, in an electric car, you'll usually have like a sport mode, a comfort mode, an eco mode, and sometimes a max range mode. Basically, you just choose either max range or eco, and you'll notice it won't be as powerful. It's usually done just down here. So into eco, now I've got an E down there on the bottom, and it basically just reduces that power, and in some cars can actually stop you going faster than the speed limit, or sometimes even faster than the car in front as well. So all these little things that manufacturers have put in just to help increase that range even further. So guys, that is an explanation on the electric range in an EV and a plug-in hybrid. Now if you yourself are an EV or a plug-in hybrid owner, hang right there. If you have any tips and tricks that you'd like to share with everyone else, put them in the comment section down below, as I'm sure everyone will appreciate that, just in case I haven't covered any that you think might be important. But guys, thank you so much for watching. Huge shout out to these guys here, Sandown Mercedes-Benz, as they help provide access to all these awesome cars you see in the videos. Until next week guys, see you then.